Okay, you are going to do some work on records today, just carrying on with last week's work. And we're going to have a go at a little project, which is to make a stock control system. So it's going to be a little shop. It's going to stock a few items. And when items are sold, we need to reduce the amount of things in stock. And also when we buy a new, let's say, shipment of whatever it is, we're selling keyboards or whatever, then we can add to the stock. So it's just a way of keeping track of what we've got in our shop. So we're going to do this by creating records. So it's going to be like a little database, and we're going to use object-oriented programming for that. So we're going to define a class, which is basically the blueprint, if you like, of the record. So say class, we'll call it item. And we have our first sub-program. Now, we use the same notation that we do for just writing sub-programs, but it's a sub-program in a class and it's called a method, but it's still a sub-program. And the first sub-program we write is a very special one, of course, underscore init, underscore. And we do have the brackets and the colon as well, like we would. So the notation is just the same as you would have for any other subprogram. The only difference is we do put our parameters in here. What are what's the information that's going to be passed to it? Well, I want the name of the item that we're going to have in the shop and also the cost of it. So there are two parameters, name and cost, 2 bits of information that when we call this subroutine, we need to pass those bits of information. However, we have to put that in. And we don't question it too much, but it is a way of avoiding clashes with names of variables. Now then, we're going to write in our attributes next. So a record has these attributes or fields, and we've got something called name, except we can't just call it name, because then when we make lots and lots of items, they'd all have the same identifier name. So we make them all different by putting self in front of it. Self.name. And that's going to be equal to name, whatever we pass to it. And also we're going to have the second attribute, which is going to be self.cost. Is equal to cost. We will have a third attribute. We won't have to pass any information to it because this will change later, and that's going to be the amount in stock. So I think I'll call this self.amount in stock. And we'll set it to 0. So we're just going to, a record at this stage is an item. This item object is just going to set up those 3 attributes. Just notice that this subroutine, normally we'd call it, and we don't have to in this case. This is called automatically when we create an item. Now, non-runnable code shouldn't do anything, hopefully. We'll just run it and just check that there's no glaring errors. That looks good. It's a really nice thing in Python. It's called type. I'll just show you how it works. It's really good as a sort of testing thing. So if you had some variables, let's have A is equal to 5 and B is equal to 5.0 and C is equal to hello. These are the kind of data types that you see at GCSE. In fact, you get asked what type of data, what data type is A, etc. I'm going to print off, and I'm going to use this special keyword in Python called type, and I'm just going to put A and think about what that would print out. Let's run it and see. And don't be too worried about seeing these angular brackets and the word class, but you are seeing that the data type is int. We could put some other things in, and this is quite interesting, this one, because this looks as if it's an integer as well, but I've put 0.0. I've introduced a decimal point, and they're called float, a floating point. And then we could also just have a look at what C is, and it says what type you've got. You've got str as a string. Do we know what the D is? Let's have a look. It is, of course, a bool. Right. A boolean. we could create our own data type. That's what classes are. It's a data type that you've defined. All of these already exist, these data types in Python, but you can create your own data type. So it's called item. I think I'll just call it something. It really doesn't matter. I'll just call it E is equal to an item. I do need to pass it some information. How many arguments do you need to pass? Well, it looks as if you have to pass it 3, but it's only 2. It's just the name and the cost. So I'm going to say, oh, I've got a keyboard in my shop, and it costs £3. So that's there, the arguments, that name becomes keyboard and cost becomes £3. And this time, we're going to see what it says when we say, what type of data is E? So we'll just run this print type E, see what it says. And you see that it says item. Again, don't read too much about this class thing, but you have created your own data type. And what I want you to do is to appreciate that. Think about all the things that you can do with normal variables and normal data types. You can pass them to functions, you can store them in arrays and do lots of things with them, and you've just created your own. So all of those things that you can do with A, B and C and D, you could do with E as well. You could certainly put them in an array. You can have an array of records, which is something we're going to do, which is really useful. So let's just have a look at that. We're going to create an array of records, which is the main objective today, is to be able to handle an array of records. I'm going to call them items, and we'll say, I'll have item 1, which is going to be item, and I'll pass it a keyboard, and we'll say it's £3. Yeah. So that's an item, and I'll have another item, and it's going to be a mouse, and it's going to be £2.50, and I could keep going and putting lots of different items in there, and there's my array of items. What is brilliant about arrays is that you don't need to have individual identifiers for each thing in your array. That was one of the major advantages of arrays, is that all of these variables, and in this case there happen to be all of these data types are all the same, they're all items, they're all records, that we don't have to get involved with any names. I don't have to call this item 1 and item 3 or whatever. I've just done it like that, and we've stored them in an array. When you and you know, if you can get your head around this today, it'd be brilliant. An array of records, really nice thing, and it's useful for you when you start being able to explore an array of records, just to use the print function. So I'm going to do that actually and just print off what items is, and it's an array, and you should see that there's 2 things in this array, and they're both objects, they're both items. So just have a look at that. You can see I've got an object there. Don't worry about this, it's just saying object, and another one that says object. Those funny angular brackets, but look at these square brackets there. We've got the array. How do you access a particular element in an array? Use an index. How do I access the first thing? 0. So now I'm not getting the square brackets, but I am getting this object, that first object. I don't want you to use any private attributes, please. Just keep them as public, so no double underscores at this stage. That's just a step too far. We'll do that later. But what we want to do is, now I've got a record, how do you access one of these attributes? Well, I'm just going to use .name to get the name of the first thing, so that's keyboard. Could I access another attribute from this first thing? Let's get the cost and run through that. 3. Now, something that we didn't need to pass was the amount. How many of these things have we got? I've got 0 of them. And I can do the same with the second thing in the array, the second record as well. I can have a look at all those different attributes. I could have a look at the name of it, etc. Okay, so I've got that. Right, now then, what would happen in actual fact is this array that you've got, this array of items, this would be formed either by uploading a file. It could be initially done by having an interface where you ask people to give you some names of things that you want in your shop. But for today, I just want you to store them initially just in an array to begin with, like that, and then you can just add some bits to it, so you can add some more things to your shop. Whatever your shop is, doesn't have to sell computer stuff, it can sell whatever you like. I'm going to put a printer in there as well, and I'll say that it costs £50, keeping it as a float. So I've got 3 things in my items. There's my database, just keeping it nice and simple to begin with, and I can start doing 1 or 2 bits and pieces with it. Now then, one thing we want your database to do, your stock control, is if you buy in a whole load of keyboards for your shop, we want to update the quantity, the amount of keyboards, say. So I do need to have a subroutine in my items class, which will just add to the amount of something. So I'm going to call it, it's a method, but we just write it like a subroutine. I'm going to call this one add, and we have brackets, etc., just as before. I do need to pass it some information, and that is the amount of the quantity of something I've just ordered a shipment of. So I'll put in quantity there. I do need to put this self in as well, and don't worry about that. Just start to accept a few things to begin with, and it sort of seems fairly obvious after a while. Now, what I want to do is, I don't know here, this is just a blueprint. The item could be a keyboard, it could be a packet of biscuits, I don't know what it is, and I want to change the amount, but I'm not calling it keyboard amount here, I'm just calling it self, because we don't know what it is. And so it's this self amount that gets changed, and the self just refers to the particular object that you've got. So if it's a keyboard, then it will be the keyboard's amount. If it's a mouse, then it will be the mouse's amount. But it's just self amount is equal to whatever the self amount was. But you're just going to add this amount of money, this amount of this quantity that you send it to. So that's it. So it's a very simple subroutine. It just changes one of the attributes. Remember, the whole concept of object-oriented programming is to have some attributes, but then some subroutines which will manipulate those attributes in some way. So if I say add, this one just gets added to it. So let's just start to build up this little stock control. And when you do yours, just have your array of items like that. Just do it like that to begin with. You'll find some clever ways of getting this from a file or something later on. But let's do a few bits and pieces. Let's print off. I want to look at the first item. So I've got item 0, that's the keyboard record. And I want to have a look at the amount that I've got. So I'm just going to put amount, that's this attribute amount. So you've got to get really good at this, understanding this whole little sentence here. Oh, made a mistake. Items is this array. Item 0 is this object here. And the amount is a record. And what value is it? It's 0 to begin with. So we should see 0 appearing when we run that. Good. Now what we'll do is we'll run this little method called add. I'm going to go, well, it's this record that I want. So I'm going to get hold of that record. Where is it? Well, it's items 0, it's the first record that I've got, this particular record, and I want to run this little subroutine which is bound to it, it's sort of attached to it, and it's called a method, add, and I'm going to add, I'll just say, I've got a shipment of 10 of these keyboards, I've just increased, I've changed one of the attributes in this record, I've got hold of the record of one, I know whereabouts in the array it is, and I've also just added 10 to the amount. Won't do anything at this stage, but I'm just going to print this off again so we can see the two different values of that record, the amount on that record. Let's just run it, and you can see you've got 10. Now then, let's just say we get another shipment of it. We'll copy it, and then we'll paste it, and this time we'll get 15 of them. Yeah, and I can run it. So when you've got your little database program for your shop, you could have a system, a menu, and it says, oh, you've just received a shipment of a particular item. You will want to update your records by increasing the attribute amount if you've just added some keyboards in this case. Some of you can think of a really neat way of saying to the user, give me the name of an item, keyboard, and it can actually search through this array, peeking into each of the array names and finding whereabouts the keyboard is or whereabouts is the mouse. So that's sort of maybe something for later on for some of you, but some of you might be sort of thinking, oh, enter the name of a item, and you'll be able to write a little program that will go through each of these records and then peek into the thing that says name and see whether it's equal to the thing that the person has typed in. Is it mouse? And they'll find out where it is, and they can locate the record in the array. That's a really, really good thing for you to be able to do. We definitely want you to be able to do that at some stage. Maybe not now, but that's something for some of you to think about. Now then, this is looking quite nice, and for some of you, you might not be too confident with records, and it would just be a case of maybe creating your own items for your stock control system, and that you could put quite a few more in and just playing around with it. Some of you might want to have this being inputted from a file somehow and thinking how you could get those records like that. What we definitely want is another method, because as in addition to buying shipments of keyboards or mice in this case or whatever it is, we could also sell things, and when we sell something we want to take that off. So I'm going to put def and just put remove, I guess. Self. In fact, I think what I'll do is I'll just copy this whole thing and then just paste it on. We'll have another method, then we'll call it remove, and this time instead of self amount plus quantity, we'll say subtract quantity. And here let's just see that in item. So I've bought in a shipment of 10, and then I've bought in another shipment of 15 keyboards, and then I've just sold some. How many have you sold? So I've removed some from the stock. I might have sold 17 of them. Okay, so it's a question of, buying things in, and then also when you sell it being removed. So let's just run through that, and you can see it's sort of working out. It's working quite nicely. We've got 25, and then take away the 17 to give us 8 of them. Right, what do you need to do? It's up to you how far you think you can take this. You've got a couple of hours to play with it. So if you're a little bit unsure of what to do, you don't need to write too much more in the class called items. You might want to just put a little if statement in here, and sort of, because what you don't want to do is you don't want to start removing stuff if you end up in the minus figures. So you might want to put a little if statement here. It says, oh no, you can't remove anything because we haven't got enough things in there to sell in stock. So you just have a little message that say, well, you can't remove this from the stock, you can't sell these. So you could do that kind of thing. You could also extend your array of records and have a lot more records and think about what it is that you want to sell. But if you are a bit more ambitious with this and think, I kind of get this, I think I could do really some quite interesting things with it, have a little menu system and actually build a stock control system that sort of says, what do you want to do? Would you like to add some new items to your stock? Because you might decide to stock a new line. You might be putting laptops all of a sudden, so you'll have to add to the array in there that you've got. You might decide that you're going to store this, because you're going to have to at some stage, in a text file. And how are you going to build up items there, items of records, and get that bit working? And you might get a little bit of a user interface, not a graphical one at this stage, just a command line where you're saying, what would you like to do? Do you want to add something to the stock? Do you want to remove it, etc.? But that's the idea today. The main thing is that you are comfortable with the idea of creating an array of records. That's really, really good. And that you can actually start accessing some of these items from the array, and furthermore that you're able to actually modify them in some way as well. And just to go back to this idea, which is really nice, could you imagine writing a program that says, what item have you sold? And you type in, the user types in printer, and it will look through the array. It will peek into this record. Oh, is that a printer? No. Is that a printer? No. Is this a printer? Yes, it is. And if it was, what position is it in? And so now I know where it is. Can I update its amount? Something like that. So I'm going to leave that with you. And do contact me, please, if you have any problems with it. And I'll try and help you out. Thank you.